Good morning again and welcome to the second day of third day ready for Count Friday night of MardiGrass, the 31st MardiGrass I'm told. So it's moving on and on and on in the MardiGrass tradition of calling out, yelling out, screaming out for reform of the drug laws. So welcome everybody to Sunday. This is the second day of the Hemposium program of discussions about good things and bad things, and where we're going and how far we've got to go on drug law reform and how the drug laws impact on our lives all day, every day in a sense. Should acknowledge and always should acknowledge that we're on Bundjalung land today, always was, always will be, acknowledging the extraordinary care and protection that the Aboriginal people have given to this land that we're on today for time immemorial, since time immemorial. And acknowledge elders past, present and emerging at the same time, of course. The session this morning for about an hour or so is about how the laws work, basically. We're all kind of lawyers. David Heilpern on my left, David Shoebridge, Senator now Shoebridge, on my right, lawyers. David's Shoebridge, two Davids. And my name is Steve Bolt, by the way. I'm a local lawyer, Lismore-based lawyer. David is a long-term member of Parliament, but now in the Federal Parliament. This David is a long-term magistrate, recently retired, now back in academia. But the basic thing about the law, the drug laws fall within the criminal law system. The police must prove in a criminal charge, if you're charged with an offence, the police must prove that you're guilty of the offence beyond reasonable doubt. That's the basic sort of premise. And what they've got to prove is the elements of each offence. So the elements of a possession offence are that you knew that you had something in your custody or under your control, that you had knowledge that what was in your pocket was a drug, for example, a little bag of weed maybe. So there's laws about possession, laws about supply, laws about cultivation. The police have to prove in drug laws that you knew what you were doing. So the broad advice about from lawyers about dealing with police, if you do have something that might be under your control or you might know something about, is to say nothing. If you say nothing, they probably, possibly, maybe can't prove an element of the offence. Simple as that. That's the basic reason why defence lawyers generally will say, if you don't know what you're talking about particularly, say nothing. You can say your name, give them address, give the police your name and address, polite, be pleasant, polite, but you do not have to give them any information at all. Your right to silence, which is what it means, what that means is one of the fundamental things that you can protect yourself with, and it continues throughout the process to hearings, any trial. You do not have to say anything, even at the state of a hearing or a trial, a stage of a hearing or a trial. Mostly this is going to be a question and answer session. Either David might like to say something. David Heilpern always has something to say for himself. I'm sure he'd like to say something about the law as someone who applied the law in the role of a magistrate for 20 odd years until recently. His perceptions and observations are always worth hearing.
Testing, that's better. Yes, the Sunday morning session is a tradition at MardiGrass of providing legal advice and answering questions. And I would like to pay tribute to Steve here. David is in the Senate, and I'm the Dean of Law, and I'm previously a magistrate, and David previously in the Upper House. But so we're often the face of this campaign. But the soldiers, and Steve is one of the soldiers, Steve and I wrote a book together in the dark, dim ages called Rough Deal, Your Guide to the Drug Laws. And from that moment on, Steve, shortly after that, moved up to the North Coast, and he has been, to my knowledge, at every single MardiGrass and continues the fight within the legal profession and is the face of private practice in what is a huge long-term battle to change drug laws. And I reckon that Steve is a saint in this field, and his long-term efforts are really appreciated, not just by his clients, but by the entire community. So thank you, Steve. So, having said that, my complete obsession is with drug driving laws. It's one of the main reasons I left the bench. In fact, David Shoebridge came up and sat in court one day and watched me dealing with dozens of these cases, probably half of whom had prescriptions. And with I'll talk about this a bit more at the session at lunchtime, 12:45 here, but I just wanted to say, to put one thing in context, and that is this, that someone somewhere about 2 months ago made a decision. A senior police officer sat down and thought, what will we do with these additional resources we have? What will we do with this? Will we go and try and get some guns that are illegal or being imported? Will we do some spot checks on domestic violence hotspots? Will we see if we can do some policing that genuinely reduces the road toll at known danger points? Or will we squander hundreds of thousands of dollars of resources and set up a ring of drug driving buses right around Nimbin, even though there is absolutely no evidence that there's a heightened risk of road trauma as a result of MardiGrass? And someone made the decision to do that. I fear that what we're going to be left with is significant drug law reform in places like the ACT and Queensland, and massive drug law reform in terms of medicinal use of cannabis, with prescriptions becoming more and more common and more easily available, but left with the circumstance that no one can use the stuff if they ever want to drive. And this is a big fear of mine. If I had $1 for every time someone said to me, oh, but I've got a prescription, I'm fine, I would be rich indeed. The biggest message I want to send out about drug driving laws is, as far as punters are concerned, is that having a prescription does not protect you from prosecution anywhere in Australia except Tasmania. And it should. And so don't think that just because you've got a prescription, I mean, you can have a prescription for Valium, you can have a prescription for opioids, you can have a prescription for barbiturates, and there's no minimalistic drug driving detection laws that apply to any of those drugs. But prescription will not save you from prosecution anywhere in Australia, except anywhere in mainland Australia, for having a detectable level of cannabis in your system. And that's 5 nanograms. That's 5,000 millionths of a gram. In other words, it's fuck all. That's all I wanted to say, to start with. But I would like David to talk about what's happening in the Commonwealth sphere, particularly with his exciting Kazar-led development. I'm so excited about it. Can you tell us about that?
Look, I can. Can I just start by acknowledging as well it's Bundjalung land, and we're talking about drug law reform. And I think if you're talking about drug law reform and you're talking about legalising cannabis, I see it as a major harm reduction campaign to legalise cannabis. And the harm that I want to reduce is 80,000 people a year getting chewed up in the criminal justice system, largely for cannabis possession. And we know that a grossly disproportionate part of that 80,000 are from First Nations communities. So if we want to actually advance First Nations justice, drug law reform is a core part of it. So this is Bundjalung land, and we have a collective responsibility to walk with Bundjalung people to get as many people free from that criminal justice system as we can. But I will talk about it briefly, but only briefly because at midday I'm actually going to do a sort of half-hour session entirely on our campaign to legalise cannabis federally. But we have, in short, we have a bill in the federal parliament. We have given notice of it. It's still out for consultation. Consultation closes on Monday. So if you're interested in having a look at the bill, do a little Google search. We'll probably put some pamphlets around it midday with a link. But we have a plan to legalise cannabis not just in New South Wales, but in one single law, legalise cannabis for the whole country. And that's never been tried before. And one of the reasons was people thought the Parliament in Canberra couldn't do it. But we have very clear constitutional legal advice that actually the federal Parliament can do it. And I actually think there's a stronger chance of getting it through the federal Parliament because the politics on drug law reform are less toxic federally than they are at a state level, and particularly from New South Wales. So, but if you want to hear more about that, midday. I never heard Steve called Saint Bolt before. That's an interesting start to this session. So it's kind of nice being here with, a saint and a former beak down the end there. But look, this is really a Q&A about questions from the floor about how drug laws operate, what you should do in the face of really shitty drug laws. But I always think we get a bunch of technical questions and, what happens there, what happens there, what about driving, what about this? The core thing I would hope you take away from this is what Steve said at the intro. Don't say anything. The right to silence. Just exercise that right to silence. And that is the single best advice I can give you. Don't volunteer anything to the cops. And part of the skill of being an effective police officer is to get you to talk, to pretend that they're on your side, to pretend that they're just having a chat. This will help. Tell me what happened. Can you explain this? Give me some details. I'm sure this was an accident. Tell me what's happening. And then off you go, and bang, you've given them all the evidence they need to charge you. So I almost feel like if we sat here in silence for 40 minutes and we just exercised a collective right to silence and you went away with that in your brain and that's what you did, then we would have won. That would be the most effective thing we can do today. Right to silence. And maybe I'll just give a little scenario to give you throw it to a magistrate. So I'm driving in a car. I'm the passenger. The cops pull us over. They drug test the driver. They don't find any evidence, but they think that they can smell, they think they can smell some cannabis or something. So they search the car, they open the boot and they find a small bag of cannabis in the car. And they say, whose is this? Whose is this? Well, Steve, you're the solicitor. What should happen in that case? And if everyone keeps stum and doesn't say anything, what would happen when the case goes before the beak down there?
Particularly if there are multiple passengers in the car, but even if there are
full.
not.
There's 4 people in the car, driver and three passengers.
Sub-scenario, one person on their own in the car. Some of the same principles apply even if you're a driver by yourself. But if there's multiple people in the car in particular, the weed's in the glove box or in the boot or somewhere, as a lawyer, my advice to the person would be, my first question would be, well, what did you tell the cops? Did anyone say, this is mine or that's his? Did anybody
What they will say, Steve, is, I went to that session at MardiGrass and I didn't say anything. I exercised my right to silence.
That's right. And I say, well, that's fantastic. You now have the option of pleading guilty or not guilty with a reasonable chance probably of being found not guilty if you take the matter to a trial. If you want to spend a bit more money, a bit more time, we could list it for hearing, come back in another few months. The police will not be able to prove, probably, that anybody had possession of that particular weed. The lawyers then enter a plea of not guilty. The police either look at it in the morning thinking, oh, maybe we're not going to run this, we'll pull it. They run it. There is the officers who are involved in the arrest are not able to say that anyone made admission. That's not the evidence that's in front of the court. Presume they told the truth. And it's mostly recorded on body cam these days in any event. So the cops have got a camera on their chest. They turn on and record. Anyway, so from a lawyer's point of view, you think, oh, beauty. We've got an argument where this person charged with the offence of possession, the police cannot prove the element of knowledge that the drug was in the particular place, or that they had any, if they did know it was there, that they had any right to exercise control over that That is, it wasn't theirs to say, you can't touch that, that's mine.
Yeah, so David, the cops produce the evidence. They come in front of you. There's 4 people in the car. They charge the driver with possession. And the driver's wearing a I Love Cannabis t-shirt, has a dodgy haircut, looks, that the police don't like. They say they smelt cannabis in there and they found a bag of weed in the boot. Or they found a bag of weed in a nondescript bag, and they've charged him, and the driver didn't say anything. What would you do with that evidence as a magistrate?
As long as the other 3 didn't deny it. Like if the other 3 all go, not mine, and there's only one, then the one who remains silent could have a little bit of a problem. But as a general rule, of course, if none of them said anything, if everyone just said, look, this is my name and address, I don't want to say anything more. My lawyer's Steve Bolt, he'll beat me up if I say anything, and he's bigger and meaner than you. As long as they said nothing, then that case would be thrown out. In fact, the prosecution would be likely to pull it before it even got there. I can give you the reverse scenario if I could, which is a case that I dealt with at a small country town not far from here, but not Nimbin, where a young person, 17-year-old, got busted with a few grams of cannabis as he was walking down the street. Anyway, they let him go home and they said, come back to the police station with your mum. And on the way to the police station, his mother says to him, look, just tell the truth. It doesn't matter what you've done. If you tell the truth, no problem, and we'll, that's what I've always taught you. Be truthful and let's tell the police the story. So they get to the police station and the police say, so, now we've turned on the cameras and we're going to interview you with your mother. What happened? And he goes, well, I found this bag of seeds. And so a bunch of mates of mine at school, and he names them all, we decided to grow this crop out the back of, Whoop Whoop. And we grew 40 or 50 plants. We sold it around the school and, and this, that and the other. We gave some to our friends. We picked up chicks with it. It was really good stuff. We were successful. And this is all I've got left. Seriously. And there we
Don't take your mum to the cop station.
Yeah. So, this is one of those times where tell the truth should be replaced by say nothing. But that is a true story. And there was 15 kids charged as a result of one boy being so honest and following his mother's advice. So that is the reverse scenario of everyone saying nothing, walk away. This is the scenario of what happens if you volunteer crimes that you've committed that can lead to not just serious consequences for you, but for a lot of others. And in that case, there was, half of them were kids and half of them were young adults. And for the young adults, this has really significant consequences. So that's the reverse scenario.
A bit of time for some queuing rather than A-ing, I reckon. So up here on the stage, it's very, very bright light shining in our eyes.
Yep,
so people put their
we'll come with
up,
microphones.
please. And can everybody please use a microphone to ask questions, because everything is going to be recorded in any event, but it also makes it much easier for everybody else in the room to hear what the question might be. So fire away.
I've just got a couple of technical questions, but I got pulled over and tested positive. I pleaded innocent. If everyone pleads innocent, I think that would be a kind of a solution. I think if everything went to trial and the police had to do a brief of evidence for every single time they pulled somebody over, it would get ridiculous pretty quickly. Even if only 10% of people did it. I had 9 hearings. Took 18 months to get to the end of it. I won on a technicality on honest and reasonable mistake of fact. I'm wondering if that would be something that you could do twice. And also, I tried to download the rough deal document. It isn't able to be downloaded from the Justice website, and a lot of David Heilpern's decisions, including mine, are missing from the registry, so there might be something you'd be able to look into. So yeah, you've got a bit of interference from higher up, I imagine, in the registry. And yeah, my question was like, could you use honest and reasonable mistake of fact twice? And what parts of the Evidence Act might come in useful given the kind of ridiculous small amount of evidence that they have. Like there's no proof of origin, there's no proof of whether it was a breakdown product of THCA. So I just wanted to ask those questions if you could answer. Thank you. And oh, by the way, I read the submission to Parliament. Awesome. I'm right behind it.
Can we start? Can one of you explain honest and reasonable mistake of fact and how it works? David, you had a part in that.
Look, and you're seeing the full team here, because Steve was the lawyer and I was the magistrate, and is that right, in Carol's case? Yeah, in Carol's case, which really led the charge on honest and reasonable mistake of fact. So, and you know, a good judgment can only come out of great submissions, and that's what the situation was in Carol's case. So the law has always been that if for what's called, there's three kinds of offences. There's absolute liability offences, strict liability offences, and general offences. Absolute liability offences mean if you had cannabis in your system, there would be no defence whatsoever under any circumstances to that. And there's some examples of absolute liability offences are things like food offences where you've got a rat in your bakery. That's the classic example of an absolute liability offence. Doesn't matter whether you knew, didn't know, honest and reasonable mistake. You got a rat in your bakery, you buggered.
That's not the law about cannabis, by the way.
No.
Yeah.
Strict liability means that the offence is you bear some burden of raising a defence of honest and reasonable mistake of fact, but that defence does exist for a strict liability offence. And normal offences, police have to prove an intention to commit the offence. So drug driving fits within that middle category. The defence requires you to produce some evidence that you honestly and reasonably believed that you didn't have cannabis in your system. And if you raise that evidence, then the police bear the burden of disproving that beyond a reasonable doubt. Does that make some sense? Is that fairly accurate?
But I think step it through again, because it is confusing. So if you've got cannabis in your system, bang, you ping. They don't have to prove that you intended. But if you prove that you were innocent of any knowledge of cannabis in your system, it didn't happen through anything you intended to do, you can say, I was in a room and I didn't understand that there was cannabis smoke in the room, or you ingested it accidentally, then the police have to disprove that. Is that what happens?
You've got three lawyers, so you need a third opinion.
Yeah, third opinion, definitely. Let's confuse ourselves.
Put it back to this, a different way of thinking about it. The police have to prove the elements of the offence of driving with the presence of a drug, of THC. They have to prove you're the driver and that there was THC present in the sample of saliva they took from you at the bus or the police station. That's it. They don't have to prove that you intended to drive with THC in your saliva. They just have to prove that you did drive with THC in your saliva. So the defence is not that I didn't mean to or whatever. The defence is I had an honest belief on a fact, not about the law. I didn't think I was, you can't say I didn't think I was breaking the law. That's not a defence. You have to have an honest mistake about the fact of whether there was THC present in your saliva.
Sorry, to answer your question, whether it would work twice, I think not. I think that once because after that it's pretty hard to show that your belief was honest and reasonable, that you didn't have THC in your system. I've never heard of the defence being run twice. I can't quite imagine a scenario where it could be. So I would think not. Do you have any different views, Steve?
No, I don't think so. I think I agree. Yeah, I'd agree.
You could have two totally different factual scenarios. So I think, one, I've heard some chatter about this lip balm case. Steve, do you want to tell us about the lip balm case?
Wait a sec, Ron. Let's talk about the lip balm case.
Yep. We'll come back to the second part of the question.
Look, after the case that I was talking about, the Carol was the fellow's name, there were 4 or 5 that had a bit of a run of them for different sort of fact scenarios. One was about passive smoking, a woman who gave very good evidence to the court, in my opinion, that she'd given up smoking at New Year's Eve. This was, she was busted about late January. So she had evidence, oh no, New Year's Eve resolution, I'm going to give up weed, been smoking for too many years, I'll give it away. She was helping out a fella who had terminal cancer. There's a thing in New South Wales, if you've got a terminal illness, you can apply to the police and they will put you on a register. The drug laws do not apply to you. You can smoke as much cannabis as you possess, as much cannabis as you like. You are immune from prosecution. This fellow living in a caravan took very much advantage of that provision. He's on the register and apparently he just smoked all day, every day in his caravan. Woman came along to help him out every now and again and helped out with his cleaning up and doing a bit of shopping for him and so on, looking after him. And she was stopped, having not smoked herself, other than passively apparently, stopped, and that was her defence, that the only reason she would have kind of THC in her saliva was because of that, and it was reasonable for her to think that, not just that she believed it honestly, but it was reasonable for her to think about that because all of the information from the government said it can't happen. All of the information from the police said on the website and in their advertising said it can't happen that way. We're not after minute users of cannabis or minute traces of cannabis in terms of what they were told the Parliament when they introduced this law. Anyway. The case was slightly different.
But the second part of the question...
case, I thought. There was a case, it wasn't so, I think it wasn't lip balm, but a woman who rubbed an oil all over herself, a cannabis oil, so it was more than just lips. She was was a cancer survivor, was fairly sure that cannabis had helped her get through her cancer a number of years ago. Now in remission, but just applied a cannabis oil fairly frequently. Again, had a reason, an explanation to the court that was very credible in my view. She was about to, not that lawyers always have to believe their clients, just by the way, but that she was in training to go on some trek, so she gave up cannabis. She was a bit of a casual smoker, but her and her girlfriend were going to go off trekking through the Himalayas or whatever, so she gave up for 3 or 4 weeks this sort of serious thing she was going to do, so she gave up smoking for a number of months beforehand to get fit. And again, the court accepted that was the only reason she could have had THC in her system was from rubbing a cannabis oil all over herself.
As for the judgment question, which was the second part, there's only a few reported judgments that only a very small section of local court judgments get reported. In the honest and reasonable mistake of fact area, of course, the case of Carroll is reported, and there's another one called Snow that is reported. But and there may be a couple of others, perhaps Spackman, but there is a large number that aren't reported. But, and how do you get hold of those judgments if they more accurately apply to your case? The difficulty is that there is copyright on those judgments. So even though I'm a retired magistrate and I might have them on my computer, I can't lawfully give them to you. But Steve Bolt has in his office a folder of all of those judgments, am I right?
Yes.
And will provide them to you without breaching copyright.
Correct.
Correct. Okay? You've got the audio. Well, why don't you type it up and distribute it?
Because there's no copyright in the words, there's only copyright in the format. So if you can whack it out and share it around.
But with the audio, if you can get someone to transcribe it or even get AI to do it, then you can distribute it. And you can distribute it to me and I can distribute it on.
Ron, let's stop. Let's move on to another question. Come on. Yeah, can you chat with these boys afterwards about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Let's do the next question. Come on. Thanks.
Up the back, I think there's a question. Oh, yeah, sorry, yes.
Hi, this is on, yeah. I guess a comment first. It seems like this is these driving laws and the saliva test seem to be a subtle way of recriminalising, given that it proves use, not impairment. Interested in comments on that. And then from the magistrate, you've explained one defence now. Perhaps interested is there any others that are useful? But also, is there any discretion you have in the sentencing? Interested in that.
there's a few answers to that, and I'll be very quick. There is an Australian Capital Territory case, and if you contact me afterwards at Southern Cross Uni, I'm happy to provide you with a copy, which gives pause for thought, because it just says that if someone's on a prescription, that's not what these laws were intended for, and threw the case out. Just like that. I mean, I think and no one's appealed that decision. So the ACT, it explains why they're doing very little testing at the moment, because that judgment would seem to indicate that. That's point one. There is a judgment in New South Wales by a single magistrate, again not appealed, where they say that cannabis is, if it's prescribed, is not an illicit drug. And the definition in the road transport legislation says it must be an illicit drug. Of course, the legislation defines an illicit drug as being THC. It doesn't say anything about, but this magistrate formed the view after hearing submissions that the word illicit meant illegal, not something that was prescribed. And it was implied that was the whole purpose of the legislation, that it was an illegal drug. So that is quite interesting. Again, not appealed. Magistrate, single judgment, doesn't carry heaps of weight. But that's a potential defence. That is the first part of the answer to your question. The comment one, of course, I agree entirely. This has nothing to do with road safety. This has nothing to do with reducing road trauma. This has everything to do with prohibition. It's prohibition by stealth, and it's a reaction to the liberalisation of the drug laws, in particular the prescription. There is no other explanation for that, for clinging to these laws like is being done, than that. So I agree entirely with you.
I hadn't heard about that second decision that David just spoke about then. So the way the law works is it's really hierarchical. So magistrates do most of the work, as David would know, and they do most of the judgments. But above them is the district court, and then above them is the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal and the High Court. And that means if one magistrate has made a good decision, other magistrates can follow it, but they're not obliged to. But if that had been appealed by the police to the Supreme Court on a point of law, which is where you go from the Magistrates Court to the Supreme Court on a point of law, and then the Supreme Court had said, yep, that's right, illicit means illegal, and cannabis on prescription is not illegal, therefore you can't be pinged on the presence offence, which is what the magistrate said. If the Supreme Court had agreed with it, then that would have bound all of the magistrates all across New South Wales. And that explains why the police didn't appeal it in that case, because obviously they think there's some legal doubt in it. So it leaves, 7 million people in New South Wales with a degree of uncertainty. If you get a good magistrate, you might be able to persuade them of that. If you get a bad magistrate, you can't persuade them of that. And that's another reason to fix these laws up, because it's very uncertain at the moment.
We have another question here.
So reasonable belief, I believe, was part of the obligations of a police officer in searching somebody to find whether they had illicit drugs on them. Does that still apply, or has legislation changed?
If I heard your question right, the grounds for search have to be for a police officer of your person, that's yourself, or your vehicle, that the officer had a reasonable reason to believe that the search would uncover evidence of an offence, not necessarily a drug offence, some kind of stolen property perhaps or whatever, okay? So they've got to have a reasonable basis for that belief. Many cases seem to be self-fulfilling prophecies where they find something, so of course they had a reasonable basis for believing it. And if you challenge it and many cases where something is found in a car in your possession, a guilty plea is the obvious thing to do, so these things aren't always tested as much as perhaps they could be. But if you take it to hearing, if you plead not guilty, take it to hearing, the police would have to explain, and you could challenge, why did they conduct the search? What was the basis for their belief at the time that they decided to search? What you look like, what you said to them may or may not be relevant. Your prior record may or may not be relevant. Might be you've got a bit of a history of possessing drugs, for example. I thought they might search you again. Lo and behold, you're in possession one more time, reasonable enough to search you.
Can I say just that is one of the key reasons why legalising cannabis is being resisted by the police. Because they use the suspicion that you have cannabis on you, young people, people of colour, First Nations people, they use that suspicion. They suspect you have cannabis, they can smell cannabis, you look like someone who might have cannabis. They use that as a reason to get in your face, stand up and say, now we're going to search you. And then they search and they find cannabis, or they don't find cannabis, or they search and then someone gets pissed off with being searched and they say, you know, fuck off, and then you get offensive language, and then they start arresting you, and then you push them back, then you get a resist arrest and assault police. And so it all starts with a reasonable or not reasonable suspicion that someone's got cannabis. So if we legalise cannabis, we take away millions of crappy interactions with police every year just by legalising cannabis. It's a key reason why legalising cannabis is a social justice issue across the country.
And I could just add this, that the classic example is the sniffer dogs. Now, if a sniffer dog sits down and wags its tail and starts salivating at you, then that gives police reasonable suspicion to search you by legislation. Because the court said, no way, that's not enough. Because half the time, or 2/3 of the time, there wasn't a problem. But now, if the dog sits down and sniffs and wags its tail and does everything, then that gives them a reasonable suspicion.
Is that right, David, or are we now going to have a fight amongst the lawyers? Because
Definitely.
Because there was originally a challenge that the dogs might be engaging in an assault if they touch you or engage with you, and that was being challenged. And then there was legal reform to say it's not an assault. Dogs can sniff you and have a go at you. I don't think they can bite you. But as I understand it, the police still say, and their standard operating procedures still say, that a mere drug dog indication is not enough, and they don't just rely upon a drug dog indication. They actually rely upon other mysterious indicia, such as you look like you might be a green or something, I don't know. So they have to rely on other indicia, and they do that because they know that just relying on a drug dog indication is pretty crap evidence, because the evidence shows that 2/3 of the time the dogs are wrong and that you're not in possession. So I thought if they're just relying on a drug dog indication, they're actually in a bit of trouble, and that might be able to allow you to say the search was illegal and then unwind the whole thing. But Steve?
I did not know that. That's interesting. I didn't know that was in the police directions, but that's there's been the history of the law around sniffer dogs has been a bit interesting and protracted, and David's quite right. The other David was quite right. There was successful challenges of that. And can I just tell a war story? The case about I was involved in, I was the lawyer in the case about where the assault happened. Rusty Harris, a well-known character around these parts, saw Rusty yesterday. He might be in the room. No, I don't think he's here. He won't mind me telling the story. Sitting peaceably in a cafe, Rusty's an old hippie, and the sniffer dog nudged his testicles under the table. And then they searched him, and on appeal to the district court, the judge found that the assault, the battery, had occurred. The dog was under the control of the police officer, so therefore the police had assaulted. Therefore, there had been a battery of my client, of the appellant, Mr. Harris, before any search had been occurred. Therefore, the police were acting beyond their duty. They, in fact, behaved unlawfully, and the evidence of the search was thrown out. So. That was an interesting thing. But there were a few cases challenging before they introduced the legislation that David talked about. So the cops have kind of sort of tried to sort it all out by saying, under the legislation, the indication by the dog is enough. David Shoebridge's point is an interesting one about how that might have been modified recently. So that's good.
So I think the law says the dogs can still give you a nudge and, you know, have a little sniff, and it's not going, if they touch you, it's not an assault. And so that doesn't invalidate the search. But my understanding is the cops are still of the belief, and their standard operating procedure says, that they don't and they can't just rely upon a drug dog indication by itself, because the data is crap. The dogs are more often wrong than right. So that wouldn't be a reasonable basis to proceed with a search.
And look, leaving that esoterica perhaps a little bit behind, it gets us back to one of the main points. You're in a situation where the police are searching you. You might have a reason to think that you don't want to be searched. you might have nothing on you, don't want to be searched anyway. But regardless of whether you've got something to hide or not be found or not, the silence is important. Just not saying anything remains important. And the hardest part about being silent is being prepared for silence. When the police talk to you, like when anyone else talks to you, our natural reaction as human beings in a social life is to say something back. Someone says hello, we say hello. Someone says good morning, yeah, how's your day? When the police put a question to you, you have to be ready to say either nothing and be ready to stand silently, or have some kind of form of words in your head that you're going to use. I'm not going to answer that question politely. I don't have to answer that question.
What if I'm a cop and I stop you, and I'm wearing cop outfit today, so that's good. What if oh, my blue cop. What if I stop and say, "Oh, Steve, mate, do you mind if I just look in your bag?"
No, officer, you can't. I don't give you that permission.
Well, the drug dog has just indicated.
I'm more formal, perhaps, in the way I might be saying. You say occasionally, you're like, no, you can't.
So what if a drug dog has stopped, wagged its tail, given you a nudge, and then say, "Well, look, I think I have a reasonable suspicion. Can I have a look in your bag, please?"
No, I don't give you. I do not give permission. Right? Say as clearly as you can. I do not give permission.
Okay. Why is that important?
I know that that is the correct answer, because if the police do find something in the bag and I am charged, then the issue for a lawyer, maybe a retired magistrate, a friend of mine might give me some advice. He might say, "I'll represent you on that." Would be, can they prove that I knew it was in the bag? And is part of the proof of the evidence of that is. How was it found? How was the substance seized in the first place? If it was taken into police custody unlawfully because the search wasn't legal, then they can't get to first base really about that there was a drug found in my alleged possession.
Absolutely. And mind you, if the police, if you don't give permission and the police say, "Oh, I'm going to search anyway," you don't want to assault them and wrestle with them and fight them off. But you've laid the basis for a defence by saying, "I don't give you permission." Once you give them permission, you're stuffed. That's the technical legal term.
An experienced police officer will make the interaction such that you give permission for the search, you see. So you'll be walking down the street, a drug dog might stop next to you, wag its tail and go woof. And the police will get very excited and they'll stop and they'll say, and you feel bad, you might be surrounded by 3 or 4 police, it's a really disempowering moment. You've got a dog next to you, and the cop says, "Hey mate, look, the dog's just indicated, do you mind if I have a look in your bag?" And the natural thing, if you're a sort of, part of a society and you're cooperative, is say, "Sure, whatever." Don't. Say, "Actually, no, I don't agree." And then they say, "Well, we're going to search your bag anyhow because we think we have a reasonable suspicion." Say, "Okay, you can do that, but I don't consent to it. I'm not going to stop you, but I don't consent to it." And that's a really hard interaction to have. And I suppose that's the challenge, because you're not always walking down the street with your solicitor on your shoulder telling you what to do, and the police know that.
Yeah, it sounds like we need to have some workshops on, because generally it's true, everyone's quite pleasant and friendly, and suddenly you're in this terrible situation, so it's really hard to shut up.
Do you remember years ago, David, Redfern Legal Centre, and I mean a long time ago, they made up those little cards that you could keep in your wallet that said, "Say nothing."
I think that might have been a Greens MP.
Okay.
Yeah.
You.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. But
And
before
we have
then,
them.
there was a T-shirt that also said, "I will not say anything, sign anything, I will seek legal advice," something along those lines. So do we still do those? Is the Sniff-Off campaign still operating in that way?
Yes, Sniff-Off is still here. Olivia Barlow might have abandoned me, but Olivia Barlow from Sniff-Off is here. Yeah, and might just give is still running Sniff-Off. And we have, I think, Your Rights with Police cards that we can give out. They're down at the Green stall.
Fantastic, that's brilliant. Thank God for the Greens.
Yeah.
That was Sunday, I can be religious, yeah.
Hey, I've got a question directed for you, David Heilpern, in regressing back to the drug driving laws, and when you described as the driving laws as like prohibition by stealth, would you consider that as a form of civil conscription by state government to inflict punitive retribution for people who do disagree with the drug laws?
Not civil conscription, but I do, at the start of this session I said imagine the mentality of prioritising having police vans around Nimbin at a festival like this. And that the logical response to that can only be that there is an ulterior motive. Nobody seriously considers that the reason for those is to do with road safety. It's actually to do with suppressing this festival, decreasing numbers, making it harder for people to get here, killing off the calls for reform. That's what it's really about. And I don't feel like some sort of, when there's a choice given to me normally between conspiracy and stupidity, I tend to stupidity as the reason for state action. But year in, year out, this is not stupidity. I mean, am I being paranoid?
No.
Yeah,
No way.
sometimes paranoia is healthy, and in this particular case, absolutely. There's clearly an ulterior purpose in it. What I'm missing with this session this year, we did this last year, and to talk about, the waste of police resources, last year at about this point in the session, we got visited by about 8 or 9 police, if you remember that.
Yep.
And they all came in the back, I think, sure, just to sort of lift the tone and be nice, or they came in to try and kind of, I think, the original intention was one of intimidation. And they used the police resources, and it happened literally in this space 12 months ago. They all trooped into the back as a kind of sense of intimidation. It didn't work very well for them, and so they haven't come back, sadly.
And then I did have one more question again.
Yeah.
You talked about with the driving laws, an honest and reasonable mistake of fact would have to be 2 very different scenarios. Would, for instance, in the case of the Carroll case, where it was such a big space of time between using and then the 5 nanograms at least being detected, and then a scenario of, say, you've gone out with a friend and had a nice dinner in Nimbin and a sweet old lady gave you a piece of cake, you went home straight to bed and woke up the next day a little groggy, would that be enough of a scenario difference to, you didn't realise you had it? You
Yes,
just said there was
it's a really good
seeds in
example.
it, but it maybe could work if that
Yes, that is a really good example of a scenario. I mean, if you didn't know you ingested it, if you didn't know that you ingested THC, then that would provide the basis for a defence of honest and reasonable mistake of fact. So it's a good scenario, and God knows it's happened to all of us. I mean, everywhere I go, little old ladies thrust cookies into my face. It's like
it happens.
What do you do?
A bad magistrate would say, sorry, where did you get the cake again? So, that's by fixing the law up, not leaving it to discretion. But, yeah, if you woke up groggy, it would be bad. So, and you'd be unlikely to wake up fine, and then you had scenario. Subject to a officer drawing the connection with Nimbin and the cake, you would have an argument.
You would, and you would have an argument, and such arguments were run before me, and such people had their charges dismissed.
Yeah,
so it is a scenario, but honest and reasonable mistake of fact is a tricky matter to run by yourself. And I'm not trying to. One of the other difficulties with drug driving laws is it's not generally legal aid available. So you're really stuck with representing yourself or coughing up money for a lawyer. And representing yourself on an honest and reasonable mistake, I saw it fail many times because it's really, it's a bit like, I would take a tick out, but I wouldn't do brain surgery on myself. And I know that sounds elitist and crap, and it is, but it's a case where running it yourself is going to be really hard.
Could I just add a footnote to the answer? The other common enough situation is a lot of, it's THC. For the driving offence, it's the presence of THC, not cannabis broadly, THC. A lot of medicinal users of cannabis prefer and get much more benefit from CBD products. The problem is, or can be, that a lot of CBD products, as I understand it, have some THC in them. So if you're a user of CBD oil and you have a strong belief and a reasonable belief that it's got no THC in it at all, then that would be also a scenario where you could say to the court, look, I was absolutely sure. You'd have to have more than just, I was pretty sure, I didn't really think about it, why not? It said CBD, you have to have a little bit more than not turning your mind to it. It's got to be an active belief, but that scenario could be. But it's a bit of a problem that people think they're on CBD and they get busted for a THC.
And this is going to be really crucial over the next 6 to 12 months, because I don't want to get too technical, but very soon you'll be able to buy CBD over the counter, the gummy bear, at chemists. Now, this is going to be quite a revolution, but that they are allowed it's still to be determined, very small percentage of THC in the CBD gummy bear scenario. So this is going to create a whole new avenue of problems.
And if in 8 months' time you're driving down the street, you've eaten your gummy bears, and that's helping with the pain or the medical condition that you have, and you get pulled over by police and you fail the first test, what do you say?
Thanks. Karen, you have a question?
Oh, yes. So I'm I'm a doctor and I use cannabinoids in my practice. Do you have any, in Victoria, do you have any advice that, what should I say to my patients? Because obviously they all drive because it's just ridiculous. Is there, because they can't have that defence, like the one defence that you've been talking about. If they're prescribed a THC containing product, they can't say that they didn't know.
Yes. Look, the answer is vote sensibly. Because, I mean, they should be going to their local members and saying, this drug is helping me. This drug is real. For the first time, I'm not using opioids. I'm not driving in screaming pain. I'm able to sleep at night. And yet this has the potential to completely destroy my life. Because there is no defence for those people. And in Victoria, the situation is worse than in New South Wales. And the reason is, without, again, being too technical, magistrates have no discretion in Victoria not to take your licence off you, even for a first offence. So, the scenario for your patients is tragic. And I was speaking to a doctor here last year who prescribes a lot on the border here between New South Wales and Queensland. He said about a third of his patients, he gets to the end of his spiel and telling them why this is going to help and here's the prescription, all the rest, and says, by the way, you can't drive, and they just walk out because they're not going to stop using their opioids or stop using whatever other drugs they're using to use something that means that they could lose their job, lose their house, lose their relationship. So unfortunately, your patients are in a pickle. Now, Jamie, Jamie, who prescribes in Byron Bay, his name will come to me in a moment.
Record.
Thank you. Jamie Record says that by really taking the time with a lot of testing and evaluation, and titrating up so that you get a very low level to start with and leaving sufficient gap, that none of his patients, bar one, who has been busted for drug driving. So he thinks that with very, very careful, that it can minimise the risks.
Yeah, I do all of that.
And I'm sure you do. But the short answer is that, and I'll be talking about this at 12:45, and I've got the actual quote that I'll say then, but your Premier, Dan Andrews, has said that they need to fix these drug driving laws for prescribed patients. The bill is has been drawn up. It's the same as the Tasmanian laws, but for a trial. And in effect, it says, if you're driving, you're not weaving down the road and being an idiot, so you're not driving under the influence, and you're using in accordance with your prescription, then you have a defence to the drug driving laws. That's been the law in Tasmania. It's also the law in the UK, Ireland, mainland Europe, Canada, and many states in the United States, that you have a defence. And that's what we need throughout Australia. And the AMA, is disgraceful in its opposition to this incredibly minimalist change. So, unfortunately, we all have work to do, but I have no clear answer for your patients other than this is a battle. And it's probably the same as the battle for same-sex marriage, same as the battle for abortion law reform and euthanasia and all the other medical issues that no doubt you've confronted in your career. This is just another one, but it's proving really sticky.
And bizarrely, if you were practicing just across the Bass Strait in Launceston, you would not have the same problem because their laws operate totally differently. They don't have the presence test. The police have to prove impairment. Your prescription would be extremely useful and valid evidence in a prosecution in Tasmania. Literally, just across Bass Strait in Launceston, your patients would not have the same problem. It's really and there is no difference in the road crash data in Tasmania to the rest of the country. Like, good laws in this space make no difference to the road toll or the road crash data. We know that. It's just fuckwittedness and bloody-mindedness in mainland states and territories that has seen this happen.
My second question was actually about the Evidence Act, because I can't use honest and reasonable mistake of fact. Again, I thought that might be the case. But in the process of my trial, I cross-examined the analyst from Lidcombe that does the test that is evidence. They don't know how many millilitres of saliva they've got, yet they're saying it's over 10 nanograms per millilitre, but they don't weigh the saliva, they don't know how much there is. So I was wondering if there's any recourse under the Evidence Act to maybe challenge the evidence itself, given that I said that I'd been eating hemp seeds, which I had, and I'd also been using CBD extract, which does have a small amount of THCA, and partial decarboxylation can happen over time, so that they had no evidence to prove that the THC they detected was not a breakdown product of THCA.
It's a long question with a bit of... But look, the short answer is, my understanding is that the evidence from the analyst would be from a... I'm not sure. A machine called a spectrograph. I'm no kind of chemist, but they do an analysis of a concentration of THC in the sample, right? So the Evidence Act has got about, 600 provisions, 150, 180 provisions, lots of provisions, who knows. It covers all sorts of issues around what is admissible and not admissible evidence. Broad law around the criminal justice system and other civil system as well, about what they can or cannot be considered by a court as evidence. Evidence does not mean truth, always worth remembering that, but what can be put before the court as an issue of fact, as truthful evidence, as truthful statement.
But just by way of example, there's a case that I dealt with in Nimbin where it was not random at all, where they pulled someone over because she had the day before resisted a search warrant, lawfully resisted a search warrant. They then pulled her over for a drug driving test, and they said it was because you blocked us with the search warrant the day before. That evidence was thrown out, and the drug test was thrown out. So there are provisions that can help you under the Evidence Act if the evidence, that is the test, is obtained improperly or illegally, as it was in that case. So it's a moving feast, and I guess we will just have to wait and see. But keep in mind, this year, New South Wales, 250,000 tests, about 15,000 people before the courts for drug driving, and almost all of those, not all, but almost all of those, I reckon about 12 to 13,000 will be for cannabis. And that's just New South Wales. When you look at how that compares to the rest of the world, that is greater than the random tests done in all other countries in the world put together just in New South Wales. So we are outliers in this field. We are the extremists. And yes, that's where it is.
So just on a sense of hope though, this whole bloody mess of drug driving laws based on impairment all started in Victoria. Like, they are to blame, the Victorians, and it was a couple of former Victorian cops who realised a good business venture that they could start selling these test kits to the police if they got this law in place. They got the law in place, they've done very well out of it. It all started in Victoria, and then it caught like a sort of, like a flu throughout the rest of the country. Now Victoria hopefully will fix it, and there is a push to fix it. My hope is the cure then spreads around the rest of the country too. Victoria started it, they should fix it, and then we can have it all sorted by the end of this year.
We are running a little bit, before we get to the next question, we're running a little bit over 11 o'clock. I'm looking at Kathleen about who's kind of in charge, so we'll just keep going.
I was going to say maybe Marie could be the last question.
Sure.
We're interested in Marie, please.
Thank you, because I'm a fierce senior woman, and nothing little and old about me, okay? Looking at changes here in New South Wales, i.e. Mick Fuller, no longer, Berejiklian, no longer. Have you noticed change? Because I've noticed, looking around Nimbin this weekend, we're not a ring of blue. We don't have TRG kicking down doors. What has changed in New South Wales?
I'll let David answer that. I think he has the finger on the pulse well and truly, but I'll say this, the interesting thing, and I'll talk about this a bit more at 12:45. In Queensland, they've just done some radical changes. And one of the keys to that radical change was that the police commissioner and the 4 previous police commissioners supported, endorsed and initiated that change. Now that's extraordinary. You're right about Mick Fuller, he's gone. The new police commissioner has not been flying the flag in New South Wales of prohibitionism. In fact, to the best of my knowledge, has remained silent. That's a great sign. But if a change in police hierarchy is key, and a change of high police attitude is key. Otherwise, these reforms would not have got through in Queensland. I'll be talking about that more at 12:45. What is the situation you think now in New South Wales, David?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. One is it's actually less legitimate than ever to be doing this. And there's more community consciousness about how crap the drug driving laws are and how crap it is to use police to whack people for cannabis possession. And that's part of the work of MardiGrass over 31 years, part of the work of community campaigners, the work we do in politics and outside of politics. It's less legitimate than ever for police to use the powers they've been given by Parliament to do this stuff. So that's one reason. I think the other reason is actually getting rid of Mick Fuller. He was a disgrace as a police commissioner. I think he brought the police into disrepute, and he was a very aggressive supporter of drug driving laws. And the new police commissioner is a genuine step change. Karen Webb is significantly different to Mick Fuller in good ways. She's still a police commissioner, but significantly different. Part of the challenge that Commissioner Webb has is that in his last 12 months, Mick Fuller, in breach of all of the accepted protocols of police commissioners, in his last 12 months, he knew he was retiring, and he literally promoted all of his mates to senior positions inside the New South Wales Police. Now, that has traditionally been a no-go. You're not meant to do that because you're meant to allow your incoming police commissioner to shape the force as they think is appropriate, the police services they think is appropriate. Mick Fuller breached that entirely. Again, another reason why I think he was an appalling police commissioner. But he breached that entirely, put all his mates in. I think that has to be digested. I think we'll see some more changes, hopefully, in senior police leadership over the next 12 to 18 months. But there is a step change, and Commissioner Webb is not Mick Fuller in good ways, and hopefully that will have some positive feedback into the Parliament and politics more broadly. And you've seen, I'm not saying it's Commissioner Webb that is the reason why we see less police on the street here in Nimbin, but there's a correlation, if not causation.
Yeah, definitely. There seems to be less police roaming around. You know, we usually have the riot squad here. So, yeah, their absence has really added to the joy of the weekend, really.
We are the riot squad.
Yeah, I know. Though I must say, our sound system today and our live streaming's been a little bit sort of erratic, so maybe they are blocking us in other ways.
Can I just thank the sound people and the lighting people and our MC champion of MardiGrass. Thank you very much.
definitely our techie people work really long and hard. They're here for all weekend, making sure the word gets out because we're using all sorts of high tech. So, yes, thank you very much, of course, to our panellists. Woo! And they'll all be back later today.